The hologram flickered to life with the smug punctuality of bureaucracy. It cast a lavender hue across the war room, bathing General Syra Halden's weathered face in soft imperium light that contrasted bitterly with the cracked concrete walls and exposed wiring of her command post. The room smelled of ozone, recycled sweat, and scorched coffee grounds. The message, however, smelled of lavender. Imperial Standard. The voice was slick with artificial warmth, the kind used by luxury salesbots and executioners. General Halden of the Human Colonial Fringe Contingent, under Statute 47.9 of the Galactic Unified Doctrine, you are hereby instructed to surrender your command, relinquish all territorial holdings, and present yourself for rehabilitation and assimilation into the lawful authority of the Empire. This message is delivered with grace. There was a pause, perfectly timed, just long enough to let the gravity of inevitability sink in. The figure in the projection, tall, tentacled, shimmering with the bioluminescent smugness of an Admiral Zex Virumta, blinked slowly, his jelly-like face changing color in a pulse of gentle condescension. Syra sucked her teeth and leaned back in her chair, which groaned under the pressure of someone who'd won enough to know what losing looked like. She was 51, sharp-eyed, with a jaw that could cut glass and short-cropped hair streaked in iron gray. She sipped from a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Warmonger" in peeling green letters. "Well," she muttered, glancing around the room at her staff, "isn't that just precious?" Across the table, Lieutenant Max regarded her with the stoicism of a man who'd once crawled 3 kilometers through radioactive sludge and found the experience mildly therapeutic. He raised one eyebrow, which for him was equivalent to a full-blown panic attack. "So we're not surrendering then?" Syra snorted. "If they'd sent chocolate and a sincere apology, maybe. But lavender and bureaucracy? Please." The room exhaled in silent relief. Around the table, a dozen misfit souls, human and not, leaned back slightly from the edge of despair. Her chief engineer, a sentient mycelial cluster who went by Chomp, released a visible spore cloud of amusement. Her comms officer, Lai, an amorphous being currently choosing to resemble a bored lizard woman, let her features shift into a wicked grin. Syra stood and paced to the window slit that passed for a view. Outside, the cratered wasteland of Outpost K9 stretched in every direction, ash-gray rock, static-charged dust storms, and the faint glimmer of the Imperial fleet hovering in low orbit like bloated carrion birds. The enemy had finally noticed them. Took long enough. The base had been her exile for the last 6 years. Sent here after refusing to bomb a refugee convoy, her court-martial commuted in exchange for commanding this skeleton outpost. The Empire assumed she'd rot in irrelevance. Instead, she'd built something stubborn out of rust and grit and the kind of loyalty that didn't need medals to exist. "We're outnumbered 9-1, Max offered, almost apologetically. "They know," Cyrus said, "and they think I care." She turned back to the table. "So, they've finally decided we're too much of an inconvenience. The plan." Lai tapped a console, shifting her form into a tall, bipedal blob with glasses, a visual cue for serious discussion. "They'll land in 48 hours, give or take a flare of pomp. Standard Imperial ground sweep, escorted by ceremonial armor units and too many drones. They'll try psychological ops first. Messages from home. Promises of re-education with plush towels." Max added, "And if that doesn't work, they'll glass us." Syra nodded. "So let's make it expensive." No one argued. They didn't need to. These were the unclaimed, the dishonored, the inconvenient truths of their respective species. No medals, but no cowardice either. They knew what was coming, and none of them liked being told to go quietly. Later, Syra made her way down the corridor, narrow, humid, alive with the buzz of overworked circuitry and pipe leaks no one had time to fix. A trio of young cadets saluted awkwardly as she passed. She nodded, thinking not for the first time how young they were. One of them, Tessa, couldn't have been more than 20. Her boots were too big. Her rifle looked heavier than her sense of purpose. Syra clapped her on the shoulder anyway. In the makeshift armory, she found Chomp perched atop a half-disassembled plasma turret, muttering in spores. Chomp's spores carried meaning, sent thoughts in varying hues. Syra had gotten decent at interpreting them. They are arrogant. They will overextend. I know, she said. It's practically tradition. We should pretend to comply. Let them enter. Then digest their command protocols. Tempting. But even you can't digest bureaucracy that dense. It'd give you ulcers. Already have 5. Delicious. She chuckled, her breath catching slightly at the sound. Laughter had become rarer lately. The weight of command didn't allow much room for levity, but Syra made exceptions for Chomp. The fungus had a knack for optimism cloaked in gleeful menace. As she walked the perimeter later that night, the stars above glittered like distant, disinterested witnesses. Somewhere up there, the vast moral superiority, possibly the most pompously named ship in the known universe, was preparing a victory celebration. It was customary for the Empire to throw their surrender parties in advance. Efficiency, they claimed. Hubris, she called it. She let her hand drag along the steel edge of a turret, its surface etched with tally marks from the last skirmish. They'd held out for years with junkyard parts, outdated weapons, and a rotating cast of reprobates. Now, they'd be expected to fall on their knees and say thank you? Not likely. She ducked into the comm center, where Lai was assembling a false surrender package. Just in case we want to send a decoy, the lizard woman explained. Let them think we're obedient mammals. Syra reviewed it. The file contained all the right keywords: capitulation, compliance, rehabilitation, with just enough formatting errors to annoy the bureaucrats reviewing it. Perfect. Send it tomorrow, she said. Let them think we're tired. Back in her quarters, she sat on the edge of her bunk, rubbing a scar along her forearm. It had been given to her by a peacekeeper drone on Earth. The irony had never stopped being funny. She stared at the wall. Photos taped there with actual tape. Her former unit, all gone now. A doodle from one of the fungus spores labeled General MOM. A scrawled quote. If you're going to go down, do it with teeth bared and boots muddy. A chime sounded. Incoming message encrypted. Syra frowned. Only one person used that channel. She opened it. A grainy, flickering face appeared. Admiral Zex Virumta himself, looking delighted in that serene, bioluminescent way of his species. General Halden, you're still alive. Good. I wanted to extend a personal invitation to our surrender ceremony. You'll be offered clemency, a chance to speak before the tribunal, perhaps even reinstatement under supervision. Surely that's preferable to martyrdom. Syra tilted her head. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? His face pulsed cerulean. Victory is a fulfilling experience. Do consider the offer. The galaxy does not need another footnote with a weapon. She ended the call mid-pulse. Later, as the base powered down to low-light mode, Syra stood outside again, watching the faint shape of the Empire's ship blotting out stars. She felt the cold wind sting her face, smelled dust and metal. She thought about what it meant to resist, not for glory or headlines, but because you weren't dead inside. Because surrender, in the right context, was another word for erasure. Back in the war room, she ran her fingers along the table's edge. Tomorrow they'd respond. Not with a flag, with a feint, with a trap, with something unexpected. She took a deep breath, let it out slowly, then typed up a message. It was short, polite. To Admiral Zex Virumta, from General S. Halden. Subject, surrender. Dear Admiral, thank you for your kind and fragrant request. After consulting with my crew, I regret to inform you that we are unable to surrender at this time. We've misfiled our white flag, and morale is unfortunately too high. Please do visit again, preferably without weapons. Warmest regards, General Syra Halden. She sent it, closed the console, and smiled into the dark. Tea with spies and bombs in the basement. The morning after the Empire's perfumed ultimatum, General Syra Halden sat in her command center, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and defiance. The base's walls, patched with mismatched panels and graffiti from bored soldiers, hummed with the energy of organized chaos. Syra's eyes scanned the room, settling on her eclectic team. Lieutenant Max, her second-in-command, stood stoically by the tactical display, his expression unreadable. Chomp, the sentient fungus engineer, emitted a series of spore puffs that translated to mild annoyance. Lai, the shape-shifting communications officer, currently resembled a tall, iridescent humanoid with a penchant for dramatic size. Syra cleared her throat. Status report? Max gestured to the holographic map. Imperial forces are consolidating their position. They've set up a forward operating base 2 clicks north. Standard procedure before a full assault. Chomp's spores spelled out, predictable. Lai shifted into a form resembling an elderly librarian. Their communications are encrypted but lack finesse. I intercepted a message about a mandatory morale-boosting tea ceremony. Syra raised an eyebrow. Tea ceremony? Lai nodded, now resembling a teapot. It's a cultural ritual among the Empire's upper echelons. They believe it fosters unity and suppresses dissent. Syra smirked. Perfect. Let's crash their tea party. The plan was audacious. Lai would infiltrate the Imperial base, posing as a bureaucratic envoy conducting an inspection. Meanwhile, Chomp would plant explosives in strategic locations, disguised as maintenance equipment. Max would coordinate sniper support from a nearby ridge. As the team prepared, Syra pulled Max aside. You sure about this? Max nodded. We've faced worse odds. Syra placed a hand on his shoulder. Just remember, we're not here to die gloriously. We're here to make them regret underestimating us. Lai approached the Imperial base, adorned in a shimmering uniform that screamed officialdom. Guards, confused by the sudden appearance of an inspector, hesitated. I am Auditor Lai, here for a surprise compliance check, Lai announced, voice dripping with authority. The guards, unwilling to challenge bureaucracy, escorted Lai inside. The base's interior was a stark contrast to Syra's command center, sterile, orderly, and devoid of personality. Lai navigated the corridors, planting listening devices and subtly sabotaging systems. In the mess hall, officers gathered for the tea ceremony, sipping delicately from porcelain cups. Ah, Auditor, one officer greeted. Care to join us? Lai smiled, shifting into a form resembling the Emperor. Delighted. Meanwhile, Chomp slithered through ventilation shafts, depositing explosives disguised as cleaning bots. The fungus emitted spores that interfered with surveillance systems, rendering them blind to his movements. Outside, Max positioned himself on a ridge, rifle at the ready. Through his scope, he observed the base's activity, noting the precise timing of patrols and shifts. Back at the command center, Syra monitored the operation, fingers tapping rhythmically on the console. The team had synchronized their watches, planning to detonate the explosives during the tea ceremony's climax. As the appointed time approached, Lai, still in disguise, raised a cup. To unity and compliance. The officers echoed the toast, oblivious to the impending chaos. Explosions rocked the base, sending shockwaves through the sterile halls. Alarms blared, and smoke filled the corridors. Amid the confusion, Lai reverted to their natural form, slipping away unnoticed. Chomp, having completed his task, exfiltrated through the ventilation system, spores masking his trail. Max provided cover fire, picking off disoriented guards as Syra led a strike team into the heart of the base. The battle was swift and decisive. The Empire's forces, caught off guard and demoralized, surrendered. Syra stood in the commander's office, surveying the opulent furnishings with disdain. She activated the base's communication system. To the Galactic Empire, your tea was delightful, but your security is lacking. Consider this a lesson in humility. As the team regrouped, Syra addressed them. This victory isn't just about strategy. It's about showing them that we won't be cowed by pomp and protocol. The crew cheered, their spirits buoyed by the triumph. Syra allowed herself a rare smile. The fight was far from over, but for now, they had proven that resilience and ingenuity could outmatch arrogance and tradition. It began, as such things often did, with a broken pipe and a lie. The outpost the Empire had deemed insurmountably secure was leaking steam from its west auxiliary duct, a hiss loud enough to mask the shuffle of insurgent boots and the occasional muffled curse. Syra Halden crouched behind a trash compactor labeled for biologically inferior waste, her breath fogging in the chill. She glanced at Chomp, who was wedged halfway inside the pipe, like a fungal snake with a vendetta. How long? Chomp released a cloud of amber spores. 1 more minute if no one notices the sabotage. 2 if they're bureaucrats. 3 if they stop to file a complaint. Syra wiped condensation from her wrist pad. Then let's hope they've got paperwork. They were deep inside the Empire's forward base, thanks to Lai's prior infiltration. A supply schedule had been altered. A few security badges had mysteriously vanished. One surveillance drone had developed sudden, explosive allergies to high-frequency sarcasm. Now Syra and her best were 23 minutes into a mission whose margin for error was measured in sneezes and sheer nerve. The team was divided into cells. Max and a demolition squad waited in the loading bay under the guise of delivery technicians. Lai had disguised herself as an HR specialist performing mid-crisis morale assessments, a deeply feared role in any command structure. Chomp, Syra, and a wiry young scout named Eno had slipped into the infrastructure maze with one goal: disable the base's defenses and hold the command staff hostage long enough to end the siege before it began. A shout echoed from somewhere down the corridor. Chomp retracted with an unpleasant squelch, then pressed his spores against the control panel. The lights flickered. A hum rose, then died, then resumed with a subtle but decisive change in pitch. Security grid? Syra asked. Looped. Cameras see last hour's footage. Alerts rerouted to the Empire's IT help desk. Estimated response time: 6 working cycles. Beautiful. They moved quickly now. Eno checked corners with the silent efficiency of someone who'd once lived in walls, while Syra advanced with the purpose of someone who'd run out of patience 20 years ago. The central control deck was 3 levels up and 100 meters wide. No guards, because the Empire didn't believe in redundancy. Their pride didn't allow for contingency. That was their favorite weakness. They reached the lift and piled in. Eno punched the access override with a tool that looked suspiciously like a spoon. Do I want to know where you got that? Syra asked. Nope. The doors opened onto the control deck, where 5 Imperial officers were seated at glowing terminals, arguing in hushed tones over an ambiguous directive labeled high priority. Obey with interpretation. Syra stepped out, blaster drawn. Hi, she said. I'm here to talk about your Empire's extended warranty on moral superiority. Chaos erupted. One officer tried to run and was immediately clotheslined by Chomp's mycelial tendrils. Another leapt for the comms panel, only for Eno to pin his hand to the console with a well-thrown knife. The remaining 3 froze, calculating risk like calculators low on battery. Syra holstered her weapon. Let's keep this civil. Within moments, the officers were zip-tied with protein cord and seated in a circle that Syra insisted was for emotional clarity. She stood before them, arms crossed, eyes sharp. I assume you've realized your base is compromised. One officer, a tall, beetle-eyed woman whose medals outnumbered her convictions, sneered. You won't get away with this. Syra crouched in front of her. But I already have. And you'll find that deeply inconvenient. Back in the loading bay, Max gave the signal. His team moved with precision, sealing entrances, jamming communications, and disarming the base's outer defenses. Explosives were placed, not to destroy, but to threaten. Spite and spanners, not nukes. The Empire understood force. It feared embarrassment. As Chomp jacked into the base's central data node, oozing into a port designed for far less organic interfaces, Syra took inventory of her prisoners. You're the strategic core of this outpost, yes? Not for long, muttered the beetle-eyed officer. Wrong again, Syra said, tapping her wristpad. The only thing moving quickly in this base is you. Specifically your bowels. A low, panicked beep emanated from one of their belts. Chomp's spores flashed chartreuse. Ingested tracking beacon activated. Triggers a bowel flush for high-risk officers under duress. Empire's always been literal with their evacuation protocols, Syra muttered. She keyed into the outpost communications and broadcast a general message to all frequencies. Attention, Imperial personnel. This is General Syra Halden of the Human Colonial Fringe Contingent. Your leadership has been relieved of duty. Effective immediately. This base is under new management. Please refrain from heroics. They will not be rewarded, and frankly, we're out of patience. She ended the transmission and turned to Lai, who had just arrived wearing the visage of a very disappointed grandmother. Report. Lai shifted forms fluidly, flicking a piece of lint off their jacket. Most of the rank and file have assumed this is a training simulation. Those who haven't are currently making tea and waiting for further orders. Syra blinked. You told them this was a drill? I told them it was a morale-building exercise, led by an elite human general. Imperial culture abhors disobedience in the face of formality. Syra laughed, a genuine, rough-edged thing. Gods, I love that. Lai bowed dramatically, then sat cross-legged by the console and began reviewing intercepted data streams. Interesting, they murmured. The base's original purpose wasn't purely military. It was storing research files on rebel adaptability models. There's a whole folder here titled Human Resistance Tendencies, Predictive Failures. Syra frowned. Send it to Chomp. Let him leak it anonymously. Make sure it reads like a tragic comedy. Max arrived shortly after, his sleeves rolled up and a smudge of carbon across his temple. All charges placed, entry points locked down. Any returning units will find themselves locked out, and if we're lucky, confused into filing a civil complaint. Good. You get 1 cup of coffee for that. He smiled faintly. Already drank it. Tasted like loyalty. They all regrouped in the base's former briefing room, which Syra quickly rebranded as the Room of Productive Spite. The captured officers sat in silence, none daring to challenge her again. The scent of defeat and Lai's experimental tea blend hung in the air. Syra addressed her team. This base is ours. Not because we had more firepower. We didn't. Not because we're better trained. We aren't. We won because they assumed we were too stupid, too primitive, or too human to matter. She looked at her crew, a fungus, a shapeshifter, a jaded sniper, a scout who spoke 3 languages with his hands, and several other misfit rebels who had no business being on the front lines, except they made the front lines work. Let's turn this place inside out, she said. Let's make it ours. And then let's tell the Empire exactly what we've done. Nicely, of course. They began the process immediately. Imperial insignias were stripped from the walls. The central command room was rewired to broadcast pirate radio. The cafeteria was converted into a communal strategy hub, complete with a mural depicting the Empire's mascot weeping into a compliance form. 2 hours in, a warning light blinked red. A ship approaching. Imperial design. Fast. Syra reviewed the scan. Reconnaissance craft. Probably checking in after the base's unexpected silence. Max stood beside her, rifle slung. We'll be ready. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened a channel and recorded a message. To any incoming vessel, this is General Syra Halden. The Empire's grip has loosened. This outpost is now free territory. You are welcome to land, but bring tea, and leave your superiority at the door. She ended the transmission and turned to her team. No more hiding. We've poked the bear. Time to see if it remembers how to bleed. The incoming ship blinked once on the radar. Then again. Then went silent. No weapons activated. No alarms. Just silence. Max glanced at her. Think they're deciding? I think, Syra said, they're terrified someone actually said no. And meant it. They waited. The screen held still. Then, in the lower corner, a transmission pinged. Not encrypted. No identification. Just 5 words. Permission to land and talk. Syra grinned. Permission granted. And make sure the tea's hot. The reclaimed outpost, formerly designated Imperial Resource Command 1137. A. Now bore no official name. Syra Halden preferred it that way. Names carried expectations, and expectations, in her experience, led to someone else writing the narrative. Here, at least, the story still belonged to the rebels. In the days following the broadcasted surrender of the Empire's prized desert base, the galaxy didn't shift. Somewhere in the folds of 1,000 bureaucratic star charts, a spreadsheet turned red where it had always been blue. Systems built on compliance faltered when faced with unpredictability. Syra stood in what used to be the command tower, now converted into a watch deck. Through cracked observation glass, she could see the courtyard where her crew moved like ants rebuilding a nest. Chomp was leading a crew of engineers in reprogramming the base's power grid, his mycelial tendrils gesturing with surprising authority. Life floated above the central console hub, now shaped like a cloud of shimmering vapor. Today's expression of optimism. She felt the wind shift and turned. Max was climbing the metal steps 2 at a time, his coat flapping behind him like a stubborn flag. He looked tired but sharp, his ever-scowling face unreadable. "They're back," he said. No preamble. No ceremony. "Same ship?" she asked. He nodded. "Same IFF signature. Imperial courier vessel. But no guns out. No fighter escort." She studied him for a beat. "Think it's a trick? If it is, they've learned subtlety. Which would be a first?" Syra exhaled slowly, letting the silence hang between them. Then she gave a faint shrug. "Let's go say hello." They descended into the lower landing pad together, past hasty barricades and crates of stripped-down drones. The ship landed without flare. No anthem. No propaganda flag unfurled. Just the hum of an engine that settled, then quieted like it had been holding its breath. The ramp hissed open. From the shadows stepped a figure in ceremonial gray, with the unassuming stance of someone who had lost arguments lately. He was older than she expected, human, neatly groomed, but his uniform looked like it had been sat on for too long. No entourage, just a worn satchel and a datapad tucked under one arm. "General Halden," he said. "Still not surrendering," she replied. He raised both hands. "Didn't come for that." She motioned for Max to lower his weapon, barely. "Then say what you came to say." He stepped forward, glancing around the courtyard with something like cautious respect. "I'm Commander Reltharn," he began. "I represent a communications wing of the 3rd Imperial Administrative Quadrant. Non-combatant division." She blinked. "You sent an accountant?" "Statistical strategist," he corrected. "Same thing." He cleared his throat. "This is unofficial. Technically, I'm supposed to be compiling a report on why this outpost failed to defend itself. But the thing is," he gestured vaguely, "it didn't fail the way they thought it would." "You mean it failed upward," she said. "Precisely." Syra stepped closer, eyes narrowing. And, Rel said, "there are others watching. Small units. Forgotten ones. Like yours. Humans, and not just humans. You've turned what should have been a minor insurrection into political inconvenience." Max crossed his arms. "Is that all we are? To the Empire?" Rel asked. "That's the nicest term I can use without triggering my collar." He pulled a chair from a crate and sat down without asking. Bold move. Risky. Syra respected that in an infuriating sort of way. "I've been in the imperial bureaucracy for 30 years. I know how things collapse. It starts with memos, with people rewording things, changing defeat to reorganization, pretending they meant to lose a battle because it realigns long-term priorities. This place, what you've done here, it's a black hole. It's pulling the narrative out of their control." Syra studied him. "So you want to help?" "I want to survive," he corrected. "Helping you might become a form of career suicide that doubles as insurance. I'm willing to take that bet." She tilted her head. "Why now?" He smiled faintly. "Because you embarrass them. And because I've read your court-martial transcript." That gave her pause. "You refused to strike civilians. You called it cowardice. You wrote, 'Victory is meaningless if it's earned by killing people who can't fight back.' The tribunal called that sentiment dangerous. I call it leadership." For a long moment, no one spoke. Dust spiraled between them in the wind. Nearby, someone began welding again, the arc light flashing like errant lightning. Finally, Syra said, "You'll be watched." "I expect nothing less." They put him to work cataloging captured data, slowly, carefully. They didn't trust him, not really. But his knowledge of imperial communication protocols saved them hours of guesswork. And when a half-dozen signals from remote rebel cells began trickling in, some encoded, others laughably obvious, Syra realized the message had spread farther than she thought. It wasn't an uprising. Not yet. It was a conversation. But conversations, when denied long enough, had teeth. 2 days later, a skirmish broke out at a fringe mining colony 3 systems south. The locals turned on their overseers and asked Syra for guidance. "What should we do next?" they asked. She stared at the message for a long time, then simply replied, "What do you want to become?" By the end of the week, 4 more outposts declared informal neutrality. No allegiance to the Empire. No allegiance to the rebellion. Just uncertainty. Uncertainty was good. It was a crack in the wall. Syra met with her crew that night under the open sky, their makeshift meeting circle lit by lanterns and old projector units. There was no ceremony, no titles, just shared breath in the wind. Max passed around canteens. Lai told a story in 5 voices. Chomp played music through his spores, a slow pulse that resonated like humming from inside the bones. Syra sat quietly, listening, watching. Then Eno spoke. "Is this what winning feels like?" Syra considered that. Her first instinct was to scoff, but something about his voice made her pause. "No," she said. "Winning is when you don't have to fight anymore. But this is something else. Hope." Lai offered. "Not yet," Syra said. "But maybe permission." They fell into silence again, letting that settle. The next morning, Syra found herself staring at a transmission that had no sender. Just one line of text. "The Empire will not forget." She smiled at it. She hoped they wouldn't. Later that day, she sat in what used to be the Imperial Commander's office. She hadn't redecorated. The flags were gone, yes, and the propaganda screen had been turned into a rotating schedule of meals and maintenance. But the bones of the place remained. She wanted them to see it, that she'd taken their house and left the door open. She stared at the star map. Dots pulsed across sectors, some red, some gray, some flickering as if unsure of what they were. Max entered. Supply ship arrived. They brought tea. "Good," she said. "I was starting to miss the taste of triumph." He smiled faintly, then turned to go, but paused. "Do you ever wonder what happens after?" "After what?" "After we win. If we win." She looked at the map again, then stood. Victory isn't when the enemy surrenders. It's when they can't decide who you are anymore. When they lose the ability to name you. She walked to the window. The courtyard below was alive with movement, not because of orders, but because of belief. There was mess and error and stubborn joy. The kind of mess empires fear. "I don't know what happens after," she said. "But I know this. Tomorrow I get to choose." That's victory enough. And somewhere, on 1,000 worlds, others were starting to choose too.